All right, I'm going to make a video that's probably going to be a little controversial, but I'm going to make it anyway, so let's go ahead and talk about this. All right, older lifters, and I don't like to have to say that, but I fall in that category, guys. I am 47 years old, closing in on 48 this year. And one of the things that I've noticed over time, I do have certain joints that don't move through the same ranges of motion they did when I was younger, irrespective of how much mobility work I do, irrespective of stretching. In fact, I would go so far as to say, for me personally, those things are 100% useless, a complete waste of time, and have literally done nothing for me. And in some cases, all they do is make me hurt and start reducing my ranges of motion further. So, one of those topics, and I'm definitely not the only one. And a lot of my people are thinking it's shoulders. It's really not so much my shoulders, it's my elbows. So if you guys look here, it's with a lot of my overhead stuff, it's getting into those positions because my elbow range of motion is way less than you would think it is. So that's a dead hang. Notice it's still not perfectly straight. When I go into dead hangs on stuff, even when I've done dead hangs with 100 pounds hanging. So again, just worth noting, and it's the same thing when I did a powerlifting meets. I had to point out to the judges and had to show them I couldn't lock it, and then they accepted it for bench purposes, and there's a protocol for that. In competition you have to do. So, and I saw the same thing with C.T. Fletcher, a number of years ago. If you guys remember when he put that video up introducing the Hulk all those years ago, and he was saying, yeah, my old elbows won't lock the same, and he was doing press downs, okay? I can relate to that at this point. He was, he's over 10 years older than me, more than a decade older than me. And I saw that. And then now I've kind of learned this has kind of happened to me over time. So here's what I'm going to say to a lot of older lifters out there. Okay. This is going to happen sometimes. And it doesn't happen to everyone. I had a guy in his 60s who could still do a full strict press with a full lock and get it behind his head. Of course, he also competed in weightlifting, and I had him as a client for over a year, and he was able to do those things. But the thing that a lot of people have to accept, they may not get the ranges of motion that they want. Especially certain movements, lockout positions, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't train them. And that's been the interesting thing. I see the comments that people give me, and I'm like, man, I really hope people don't think that way, because if they do, and if you're listening to that advice, it's going to shortchange your results. Because notice, I'm a pretty big, pretty strong guy in spite of it. Okay, and notice I still train those movements. But you will get people who will say, well, you need to reduce the weight until you can do the full range of motion, and it's like, well, that would mean no weight at all. Okay, so, what do you want me to do? Just use a broomstick? But what happens when I can't do it with a broomstick? Right? So even for someone like me, or for maybe you out there, if you cannot lock a PVC pipe or a broomstick overhead, their advice would be, well, don't train the overhead press. And I've had people say that. Same thing with pull-ups. Well, if you can't get your chin all the way over the bar, I can do it on a chin up, but not a wide grip pull-up, not even close. But I can't do it with a lat pull down. So, you would say, do you not train it? Look at the size of my lats. This is my main lat exercise. I think it's doing fine. And I think the thing that people have to remember with these movements, are we training a movement or are we training a muscle? Now, if you're training a movement, by all means. Like if you're training to win a pull-up contest, and that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. If you're training to compete in the strict press and they don't allow you in strength lifting to not lock it, well, then you got a problem. But what about if we're talking about gaining muscle? Well, most of the research is showing the lengthened positions and stretch positions are where most of the hypertrophy happens. So are you able to hit your lengthened positions? If you can hit lengthened positions, then by all means train them. All right, but what if you can't? Well, if you get close enough, if you get close enough, and I think one of the things I've noticed with a lot of mobility stuff, lengthened positions, our lifting does improve those more. Like in other words, what I found with squatting when I started losing hip mobility and stuff, if I just went and started doing heavy pause squats, I was able to start getting well below parallel again. And I would suggest those things are for a lot of you out there, that's the case. If it's because you're not stretching deep enough, you may find that if you reduce weights, you can get into a deeper stretch. Yeah, absolutely. Pause work, doing the full ranges of motion, do those things. By all means, do those things. But as long as you are getting into the deepest stretches and positions that you can, will you see good hypertrophy on all these exercises? And I think the answer is yes. Because usually that's what I've noticed a lot of times with a lot of the joints and tendons over time. And I think a lot of it is accumulation of minor injuries, scar tissue, calcification, right? That a lot of lockout positions guys start losing. And again, I've seen it in other lifters older than me over the years, and now stuff I've noticed for myself. I remember chatting with Big J when I met him just randomly at a hardcore gym I trained at, and some stuff he was talking about with some of his ranges of motion. He just did the best he can, having done the whole pro bodybuilding thing and everything. But that's the thing. A lot of times it's lockouts that we're losing, right? We're losing a lockout ability, not so much stretch position. Well, that's not going to matter for hypertrophy because, ultimately that's what more and more data is showing, is that the lengthened positions really are the most important for hypertrophy. Not saying shortened positions don't matter. I want to be clear. I do not buy that. But if lengthened positions are the most important, well, then train those lengthened positions. If that's what you can do, your gains are not going to suffer. You're not going to gain less muscle as a result of it. Because again, at the end of the day, fatigue is fatigue. And as long as you're reaching most of the muscle fibers, we can argue about range of motion limitations maybe costing you 1% of your gains. Okay, but most of the muscle fibers in a muscle do work through a pretty good chunk of the range of motion. And as long as you can get them to failure and get tension on all those fibers, you're still going to gain muscle mass very effectively. So again, I would suggest to people, rather than say, oh, I can't fix this, well, do the ranges of motion that you can and then continue to work on it. In other words, if you're struggling with various range of motion limitations, continue to work on fixing those and stretching or movements or mobility or whatever you need to do. But that doesn't mean that you don't train the movement, and it doesn't mean you can't keep getting jacked and getting strong because of it. Okay, so don't buy into that other, well, if you can't do it, just don't bother. It's almost the mindset you see from people. Or no, we'll just go down to the empty bar for a year until you do. It's like, no, dude, if you can do 300 pounds, and put 300 pounds on the dang bar and do what you can. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.